Well, good afternoon, everybody. Looks like we do have a quorum today. So we will go ahead and get started. I am not Becky. I'm Mayor Russ Kessler. So Becky's tied up in a council meeting right now. Looks like it's gonna be a long day for them. So glad to be in Hayesville myself. So. All right. First thing, approval of the TPB agenda for today, August 13th, 2024. I get a motion for approval.
I'll make a motion to approve the.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second to approve today's agenda. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? All right, next is the approval of the TPB meeting minutes from July 9th. Has everybody had a chance to go through the minutes? If so, I would entertain a motion for approval. We have a motion and a second to approve the July 9th TPB meeting minutes. Any discussion, questions? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? All right. Next, we have the director's report. Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the Transportation Policy Body. Thank you so much for your presence. We needed a quorum, and we appreciate your leadership for this Transportation Policy Body. We have a few items from staff to report to you. So Dora and Kim have like a few items. So let me request Dora and Kim to present those. MTP, annual bicycle count, safety, and grant opportunities. Dora.
Good afternoon. I'm Dora, Guy with Transportation here at WAMPO, Transportation Planner here at WAMPO, sorry. So just a little bit of updates on the MTP, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan for 2050. We're starting to put our drafts online. Currently, we have 2, and shortly we'll have chapter 3 and 4 uploaded. Feel free to, if you have any comments, send them our way. There are some gaps still in some of them. We're still trying to get some data and make some graphics or tables or maps from. So just be aware that there might be some gaps still in some of the chapters, but we're working on getting those filled in. And our website is www.wampo.org/MTP2050. So now it's time for the annual bicycle and pedestrian count. Like every year we do a manual count, and we can't do it without the help of volunteers. I just checked before this meeting, and we have about 25 volunteers signed up so far. We do need a little bit more since we do have 35 different locations, potentially 36, trying to see if we can add one in Bel Air. So if you would like to share this with your jurisdictions, coworkers, friends, neighbors, grandkids, kids, please do so. We really need the help of those volunteers to get these counts, different locations counted. And this information is super information for us because we can look at projections, and different organizations use it as well. I know I've heard from Bike Walk Wichita that they use our information. So please, please, please share. If you have any questions, you can contact me or anybody here at WAMPO, and we can give you more information. We have flyers.
Do you have your flyers in PDF?
Yes.
Could you send those out, please?
Mm-hmm. Any other comments, questions?
Okay, thanks, Dora. And
Thank you.
Kim has an update on safety updates and grant.
Good afternoon, Kim Negrete. I'm your multimodal transportation safety planner here at WAMPO. Just a couple of updates. As you are aware, we are kicking off and launching our Safe Routes to Schools planning across the entire region. We're very excited to be able to include the public schools, school districts, and private schools. We have the selection committee has selected a consultant for that. So we're just working through the contract, and that process hopefully will begin during this school year. And that is to help the schools create their Safe Routes to Schools plan, which would identify those infrastructure and other improvements to increase safety around those areas. In addition, we partnered with KDOT to have the behavioral safety grant. This was just awarded. KDOT did select one applicant this round. We do hope that this funding and grants will continue. At this point, they selected Bike Walk Wichita to do a media campaign geared towards pedestrians, including the motorists and the pedestrians. And I know they're planning to hopefully work with the other two applicants because all of the applications were excellent and scored very high. So very excited to see this program looking at the behavioral side in place of just the infrastructure improvements. And of course, as you all know, we were awarded a Safe Streets and Roads for All Planning and Demonstration Grant back in December of 2023. So we're working with the jurisdictions to get those projects lined up and the safety plans kind of lined up so that we can get that agreement done with the Federal Highway Administration. So working through that process. And then just wanted to give you an update. We had our quarterly ICT Safe Coalition meeting. It was a success. We had 20 or 30 people on the call giving great input and advice on how we can improve our safety. This group is taking a lead on helping us implement the strategies that are in our comprehensive safety action plan. So it's really exciting to see their innovative ideas and approaches. And just to also make you aware, the ICT Safe Coalition is kind of the umbrella coalition that does also include our Active Transportation Committee and our Drive Safe Sedgwick Committee. So they are doing great work, and you can find all of these details on our website. One last thing, we learned about a funding opportunity from the U.S. Department of Transportation that we wanted to make sure you are all aware of. Most of you have probably seen the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Grant Program. It is due September 30th. And this grant is really focusing on projects that reconnect communities by removing, retrofitting, or mitigating highways or other transportation facilities that create barriers to community connectivity. So just wanted to make you aware, there's a link. There are several webinars that can help you with the application. And as Chad has mentioned, we at WAMPO want to support your applications. So if you need letters of support or anything, just let him or I know. Any questions on the safety projects? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kim. Also want to recognize our Rick Backlund and Mike Moriarty drove all the way from Topeka today. Appreciate your presence. Also want to recognize Will Sharp. Let Rick introduce Will Sharp.
Yes, and sorry, I did want to introduce, we have made a selection for our community planner that replaced our previous one, and Will Sharp has joined us. He has a master's, just wrapped up his master's in urban planning, but he's worked with the Topeka MPO, City of Lenexa, also very active in APA. So I think he'll be very pleased with working with him. He will be on our on the WAMPO Technical Advisory Committee. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Great to be back. Thank you.
With that, Mr. Chair, thank you.
All right, thanks. Definitely welcome. So next we have item D is the consent agenda. Chad?
So
Thank you so much, Mayor. The consent agenda, you have heard over a period of time, many times, the request for proposals Peter has put together, all these at times, and we are seeking your approval at this time. And sorry, Mayor, to stop you, seeking your approval at this time.
So I do have a concern about three of these proposals. So they are collecting data that becomes surveillance of individuals. And one is explicit about that. The other two are more implicit, but they are doing that about individuals or vehicles. And that type of data in the wrong hands is very dangerous. It can be misused and infringe upon our Fourth Amendment rights to unreasonable searches. I think it would be wise for WAMPO to establish a policy to make it part of these three contracts that the data collected and retained can in no way be able to identify individuals. So I want to make a motion to approve the consent agenda, subject to wording being added to the contracts listed at items Roman numerals 1, 2, and 4. The provision that any data collected and retained by systems developed with these programs can in no way be able to identify individual persons in their image or likeness.
All right, so we have a motion to approve approve the consent agenda with items 1, 2, and 4. Could you read that last part again?
Yes, the provision for the items 1, 2, and 4, that the data collected and retained by systems developed with these programs can in no way be able to identify individual persons in their image or likeness.
So Chad, does that?
Yeah.
Does that, all right?
Yes, that makes sense. Let me request Lynn Packer. Lynn, on the MyoVision counting, that is protected, right? The privacy is protected in the MyoVision accounts from your experience, right?
Yes, I would just say that obviously the image is identifiable if you could see them on a screen. But as far as that data that's being collected in the cloud being used by a third party to identify them, that is not allowed and is part of our contract with them.
And I understand that, but if the image is collected and retained, somebody who hacks that system could get that information. And that's the concern, is that I'm sure that all the people who are wanting to do this have very good intentions, but there are bad actors out there. And we hear this stuff happen all the time. These systems are being hacked and data is being stolen. And that's where it's bad. And we also have some issues with our own government doing some things they shouldn't be doing, and the same issue.
We'll be sure to include that in our contract agreements, and we'll be sure that privacy is protected per your advice, Mayor. We'll follow up on that.
Thank you.
All right, so does everybody understand that motion? Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda with the along with the changes or the additions that Mayor Panaj present. You want to go say that one more time?
Okay, it's a provision in items 1, 2, and 4 that any data collected and retained by systems developed with these programs can in no way be able to identify individual persons in their image or likeness.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed?
Aye.
It looks like the ayes have it.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, next we have item 3, the public comments. This is the open forum for the public to provide comments about any specific items on this month's agenda or anything else. So is there anybody from the public that would like to speak? Anybody online? All right, not seeing any, we'll move on to the action items. First A is the FFY 2025 through 28, the tip. Peter?
Good afternoon, TPB members. So I'm excited to present to you the FFY 2025 to 2028 tip. So what is the tip? It identifies projects being implemented within the WAMPO region for the federal fiscal years 2025 to 2028. All regionally significant and or federally funded transportation projects must be in the tip before they can proceed and need to be consistent with MTP. Programs, projects within the WAMPO suballocated federal funding program, it comes out to about $12 to $15 million a year. And also non-suballocated funding is in there as well. And to all, the new FFY 2025 to federal fiscal year 28 TWIP includes 130 individual projects and programs valued at approximately $1.1 billion. And just kind of do a whirlwind tour. Here was kind of our timeline. We started with the call for projects back in last September, spring 2022. We had staff review and project selection. June 12th to July 11th, we had our public comment period. July 22nd, we had our TAC recommendation. And today we are presenting this for our TPB approval. In the tip, we of course have a brief map and summary, and this is also available in the packet as well, of all of the different projects that are in the new tip. We have our table of suballocated program or suballocated projects here. These were are the funding recommendations for the new tip years, FFY 2027 and 2028, in addition to some funding surpluses in 25 and 26. This table is also available in your packet. Sorry, I'm going through this really quick because it's quite an extensive document. In here, you can see all of our sub-allocated projects on this table, totaling about $62 million. Here you also have a map of our sub-allocated projects as well. Again, this is in the packet, but also can be found online for closer review. We also went through and looked at several different parts of different projects that are part of every tip. We looked at how each project might affect our different performance measures that we look at. The fiscal constraint analysis is also a part of this to ensure that we have reasonable expectation of being able to fund all of the projects with projected revenues over the next 4 years. And many different analytics on all of the different projects and how that breaks out in cost, all part of the fiscal constraint and general tip analysis. We also have an environmental justice section, and from our analysis, we found that that the fiscally constrained tip does not disproportionately affect our environmental justice areas or those communities. During our public comment period, we did not receive any public comments, which finally brings us to our action options. I went through that very quickly. Please let me know if you have any questions. It's, again, quite an extensive document, can be found online on our website. So for our action options, we have approved the FFY 2025 to 2028 tip as presented, not approved the tip, or approve the new tip with specific changes. Our TAC recommendation was to approve the FFY 2025-2028 tip as presented.
Anybody have any questions for Peter? If not, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the FFY 2025 through 28 tip as presented? We have a motion and a second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? All right, moving on to item B. It's the amendment 1 to the tip that was just approved for the 2025 through 2028.
Yes, so this, you are seeing that on the screen correctly. We have the First Amendment here for your consideration to the FF 2025-2028 tip after it's approved. So after the start of the public comment period, we learned of time-sensitive project additions, modifications that would need to be made to the tip in this federal fiscal year, which concludes in September 31st. So this includes programming of the FHWA FFY 2024 August redistribution funds to qualifying projects, as was determined in coordination with KDOT and the WAMPO Project Selection Committee. And among those, we are quite happy to receive this additional funding for our August redistribution projects. We're working with KDOT staff. We were able to determine that 3 eligible projects could receive up to $3.2 million in funding, and we were quite happy to receive that total amount. The additional funding changes were enacted through the following amendment and administrative adjustments. Ideally, it would have been, we would have ideally liked to get all of the changes in on this amendment. However, we ended up doing a quick administrative adjustment in late August to the old tip that is just now gone out to make sure we got those funding changes in the time frame that was necessary. So we enacted the Delano Transit Center and Multimodal Facility FTA transfers for their funding and administrative adjustments to both this new tip we just passed and to the previous tip. And then the funding for the West Street I-235 MacArthur project will be enacted through this amendment that we are considering now. So you can check out the full details of the tip on the screen here. It's also as an attachment linked in your packet and a link at the bottom of the web page at the URL shown. So there are 4 projects in this amendment that have changes that require TAC TPP approval: 2 requests for new projects, requests for a tip to be removed from the tip, request for a project to be removed from the tip, and 1 for a project to be modified in the tip. In addition, I bring notice of those administrative adjustments that we just spoke of.
So is this clear that there's 8 projects on this list? Is that correct?
Let me take a second look at that. Get to the.
Yes, Mayor, that's correct, yeah.
There. So just so I ensure we speak to this, we had our public comment period from July 19th to August 2nd. TAC made the recommendation on July 22nd, and that brings us to our vote on this amendment today. And so on the map, you can see the mappable projects here for this. We have City of Wichita's West Street I-235 MacArthur project. We had a new addition from KDOT, the EV charging station at the Exploration Place. The KDOT Which Way video wall project was combined with another project into the KDOT Intelligent Transportation Systems Improvement Project. And then several administrative adjustments, including 1 KDOT project, one Garden Plain project, the Harry and Main Street sidewalks, the Wichita Intelligent Transportation System, the Wichita Multimodal Facility, and the Wichita Delano Transit Center. Of those projects, these are the ones that require formal action. And this is also available in your packet as well. And then also you can see here, we have our suballocated funding changes and the total amount of funding for each project.
Hey, Peter.
Yes.
There is no funding changes on the Wichita Intelligent Transportation System. Can you go over that? It's just, it says zeros all the way across.
Oh, on the Wichita Intelligent Transportation System, East 21st. So on that particular project, the overall amount of funding did not change, but we changed the funding program that it was receiving federal dollars through. So instead of receiving $167,000 in CMAQ funds, we consolidated all of the federal funding for that project under one program. If possible, we try to consolidate program or project funding under one program. It makes things quite a bit simpler for managing the different federal dollars and their different requirements. Oh, sorry, Nick. Isn't that?
Mr. Chair, I can add more detail if that's needed.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, Rick Backlund, Federal Highway Administration. For example, CMAQ, the program where the money was coming from, there's a lot of air quality monitoring reporting that needs to be submitted and documentation. STBG, Surface Transportation Block Grant, is way more flexible. So what they went by moving that we're taking a lot of administrative load off of. It's still federal funding, but that's what happens with that.
Thank you, Rick.
Peter, go ahead.
That brings us to our local, state, and federal funding changes. This is also available in your packet, but just to give you an overall dollar change amounts that occurred with this amendment. And finally, Amendment 1 meets our requirements. We had the public comment and review period. It's consistent with the current MTP, Reimagine Move 2040, fiscally constrained, and adds a total amount of $3.45 million in funding. So that finally brings us to our action options. We can approve the FFY 2025-2028 TIP Amendment 1 as presented. Not approve the FFY 2025-2028 TIP Amendment 1, or approve with specific changes. TAC recommendation was to approve TIP Amendment number 1 to the new TIP as presented.
First, I just want to, say thanks to WAMPO for doing this fast turnaround. I know it was a short time frame to do this and moving money around from one fund to another fund and getting adding all the having a lot of money to put into these projects. So definitely appreciate that. Anybody like to make or anybody have any questions for Peter? If not, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the TIP Amendment 1 for FFY 25?
Make a motion to approve tip 1 for 2025, 2028, or whatever the years are.
25 through 28. Is there a second?
Second.
So a motion and a second to approve the FFY 2025 through 28 TIP Amendment number 1. Any discussion? Oh,
Mr. Chair, quick comment, and want to thank Rick Backlund and Mike Moriarty also for August redistribution. They had been instrumental in working with WAMPO staff. And of course, Peter did an amazing job in making this in a short period of time, as our chair was alluding to. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, if I can also just add that KDOT did a lot of work. This is if folks are wondering what this is because of the way funding and obligations happens, there is at the end of our federal fiscal year, there's this additional pot of money available for obligation. And if you don't obligate it, you lose it. So there's a lot of mechanisms within there. Actually, our proposals in Congress to try to just deal with this problem. So Kansas had $156 million in additional redistribution. They took advantage of 90 million, and of that 3 million came here. So it's not in effect new money, but it's additional ability to use the federal money. So that was what came about. So it's a lot of work, but hopefully it allows some projects to move forward faster that would not have. So it was a big effort. So again, thank you to WAMPO, but also to KDOT fiscal that Mike's working with. So thank you.
yeah, definitely. All right, we have a motion and a second. Everybody for approval, say aye. Aye. For not, everybody disapprove, same sign. All right, ayes have it. So the motion passes. Next, we'll move on to the item C, which is the population projections. Jonathan, Peter.
John?
Thank you. So I'm Jonathan Norris. I'm a research economist for Wichita State University's Barton School of Business's Center for Economic Development and Business Research, which is quite a mouthful, but you probably also know me better as the guy who always gets up here to talk about the population. We are partnered with WAMPO to develop the population forecast through 2050 as part of MTP 50 and the travel demand model. So the goal for today is we want to review the methodology. We want to review the forecasts by the jurisdictions, and I also added in some detail about some other demographic characteristics that are within the model, and answer any questions that this group has before approval. So the background on this is the purpose of this forecast is to enhance the accuracy of the travel demand model as to really understand how the transportation system will be utilized through 2050. We need to understand how the population is expected to grow through that period, right? This is an extension off of our effort to develop a population forecast last year for the region, which that one we used our county level forecast and allocated down. There were some problems with using that methodology as it didn't really capture some of the unique elements of the communities. So we had to rethink on how this could be structured, and we actually decided to make the methodology in line with how we develop the county level forecasts, and then get some additional data from the communities so that we could fine tune those estimates out to each individual jurisdiction. So the purpose of today is we're going to review the actual estimates, and then we will motion for approval. the population forecast is really built up of these four separate elements. Okay, it is what's called an age cohort survival model, which means that you take the starting population at the beginning of your analysis period, which we chose the 2020 decennial census for that to be in line with WAMPO's historical data. And then that public is aged up over the duration of the model, and it's dynamically subject to fertility, so people being born, and mortality, so people dying, and migration. So that migration element is something that is oftentimes more difficult to capture at the local level, especially in an area that is as interconnected as the Wichita Metro. How we got at that migration estimate is through these three elements. You have your community net migration trend, which is like historical data on how people are moving in, what their characteristics are in terms of race, ethnicity, and age, to look at what has the history been in these communities. There's the long-term employment forecast, which we also developed both for WAMPO and utilized in this model to look at what we're expecting the overall growth of employment across each industry is going to be in these different jurisdictions through 2050. And then we have the building permits data. This is where the real meat of it has been lately, where we've been working with members from each of the communities to provide data on building permits for the last 5 to 10 years, and also looking at what building permits trends are likely to be in the future. This gives us a sense of forward-looking growth potential as communities that are investing more in building housing and apartments have more opportunity to grow in terms of their population. So actually, before we get to that, one of the things I think is important to consider is the question is always asked with any population forecast of how accurate is it, which is really maybe not the right question. The right question is what is captured, like what variables are captured within the methodology. So I wanted to go over what is captured within the model. So we have labor demand through that employment forecast and those core industry drivers for each of those jurisdictions. You have revealed consumer preferences in terms of like which areas and which services they are that are most in demand. And you have elements of community vitality. So how much investment is each community making in those core population growth drivers. What's not revealed or what's not captured within this is disruptions that are not economically based. So you have, well, I shouldn't say economically based. Public policy decisions can certainly be economic factors, but we're not forecasting any specific policy changes. In that we're not forecasting technology shifts or changes in natural resource utilization or natural disasters. So we did want to be upfront. These are things that can actually really change the trajectory of the population growth. So the overall population growth through 2050 from 2020 is about 670, or it's about a change of 125,000 persons from where it was in 2020. Up to about 675,000 people. All of this data is available in your packet. The unincorporated region is expected to decline by about 14,000, and then the growth tends to be in the larger cities and areas that have the most real estate investment and building permits. The exception to that being Wichita. One of the elements that is kind of revealed in this is that there is this pretty significant push factor out to those peripheral communities. And we'll see that a little bit of that later on. Now, that growth rate cumulative through 2050 is about 21.7%. That annualizes out over that period to 0.72%. This aligns a lot more closely than the initial forecasts with the city estimates and historical growth trends for those jurisdictions. It's also about twice as fast as the statewide average over that period. So there are a lot of hallmarks for growth for the community. A couple of highlights within this is that Mays and Goddard are expected to more than double their population from where they were in 2020. Viola and Eastboro are the only incorporated areas that are forecasted to decline. And as I said, that rural out-migration and urban sprawl trend continues. And we do see that declining population in unincorporated areas. This is something that you have not seen before. All of this data was in the model. It's just we weren't bringing that to this meeting. Now, changes in the share of the entire WAMPO region's population, like from 2020 to 2050, right? You have 13 of the 23 jurisdictions or areas, I'll say, that we delineate in this model that are growing in their share, like of the regional population, and you have 10 that are shrinking, right? Some of the highlights in there are that Mays and Derby, with their significant growth, cumulative, both each grow by 1.2 percentage points as a fraction of the regional population. You can see that broken out, like which communities are growing in share versus declining afterwards. We'll make sure this data is available. This is newer chart, so it's not in the packet. Now, the composition of ages is also changing somewhat over over this period, but not nearly so much as we do see on the statewide. So we wanted to address why some of these dynamics are happening in the way they are. We see in the earlier periods of the forecast, so through about 2035, we see older age cohorts are growing in their proportion of the population initially, but by 2050, they're actually falling back to pretty much the levels that they're at right now. The largest growth in in share of the overall population is among younger working age individuals. The number of births or in a 5-year forecast, that's individuals age 0 to 4, that grows, but it's slower than the overall rate of growth for the population. So that cohort of the population is a little bit smaller in 2050. And then the age dependency ratio. So how many people of working age do you have compared to people below age 20 and over age 65? It goes a little bit, it increases by a little bit, but that's actually not nearly as much as it is for the state. And the migration, the in-migration to the region is really the reason why. There's a lot of discussion that happens about an overall aging population. It's a concern statewide. But when you have as much in-migration to the Wichita region, the overwhelming proportion of those in-migrants are people of like core working age. That actually acts as a buffer for this region in the forecasts to an aging population. There are more individuals over age 65, but the growth in those younger age forecasts tends to offset that in the forecast. Racial and ethnic composition. So there's some pretty significant changes from 2020 to 2050 in the actual composition along racial and ethnic lines. It's significantly more diverse in 2050. I've just put some highlights there on the left-hand side that in 2020, minority races aggregated represented about 30.7% of the population, and by 2050, it's up to 35.8%. Hispanic ethnicity goes from 15.2% of the population in 2020 up to 21% in 2050. The growth rates also vary pretty significantly across those, which is where you get your like much faster growing minority segments there. With a lot of with the slowest growing component of the population being individuals who identify as white alone. This question always gets asked of why. Like when we see that big of a disparity in population growth trends, it's not actually that there is this pronounced of a difference in terms of fertility across those groups. It's about identification, the trends. So it's becoming much more prevalent over time that individuals who previously identified as, for example, a white race alone, identify as 2 or more races. And so they would show up in that other category. That tends to limit the growth rate for white alone individuals, and it provides a boost to that other like other race category, which is also where we put individuals who identify as 2 or more races. So if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask about that. These tables again aren't in your packet since we created these more recently, but we'll make sure that that's available to anybody. So the key takeaways before we motion for approval is that the WAMPO region is expected to grow, and its growth potential is actually quite a bit faster than the statewide average, a little bit more than double actually. The areas that are growing the most are tending to be the larger cities, and in real terms, the real driving factor for a lot of those larger jurisdictions other than Wichita is that real estate development and increase in the number of building permits over time. That's where you see a lot of that growth happening more on the peripheral regions of the city. That increasing diversity is going to be a big factor in consideration. And with that comes a shift in demand for goods and services. There's cultural elements that need to be considered in that. Based on CEDBR's own research, like about diversity within the workforce, it's correlated very strongly with increased equity of outcomes, wages, and employment opportunities. So there's a lot of benefits to the overall workforce from that. Lastly, that age composition does see that initial upward shift in terms of ages, but that tends to fall back off as in-migration acts as a buffer to that. And births, so like that real long-term trend of, what is going to keep the population, growth going further in the future is steady and remains at near current shares of the age distribution, and you have that increasing counts because of it. Questions before we move on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. First, Chad and Peter and I met since the last time because I've had some concerns all along. And I've got two concerns I want to talk about today, which both impact how we use this data in the future. So my first concern is that this is a great crystal ball. I'm hoping it's right, but it could develop cataract at some point in the future. And that cataract is going to change what happens to the future. So we need to make sure that we weigh this as you're making decisions on transportation projects based on what the reality is at that time, not what we think it's going to be. The second thing that I talked about with Chad and Peter is that if we use these and decide, and for example, I'm Sedgwick County, so I do have a vested interest in what happens with Sedgwick County. It says we're going to reduce the size of unincorporated by 30.6%. If you use that reduction of 30.6% on funding projects that connect all of these other major cities, then you're making a huge mistake because we have to move people, goods, services between all of those population centers. So you've got to make a wise decision in the future. I'm going to be gone, but I'm just cautioning you all that use this with a grain of salt and make sure that we're making wise decisions in the future. This should not be the driving factor on funding. Thank you.
To actually add on to that, I agree. It's very important to not take forecasts, especially long-term forecasts, as a crystal ball, right? And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure to point out, here's what's captured, here's what's not, because this is an evolving ecosystem, right? And even that starting point of 2020, there have been some changes even since then. I know we worked with Andover to address some concerns that were had about, well, we're already at the level of growth, we were expecting to be at by 2025, right? And so, I very much recognize that and agree that there needs to be careful thought about reevaluating this on an ongoing basis.
Kind of the counterpoint to that, though, and maybe Commissioner Dennis, you can weigh on this too, but I think this lends credibility to the argument that we need to keep working on the Northwest bypass. The growth in moving west towards Goddard, Mays, Wichita, moving out in that direction, moving transportation through the western half of the city and out into western Kansas. I think we just need to keep working on that. I think 40% of the right of ways purchased. It'd be nice if we could get some additional help to get that thing moving. Probably won't happen in my lifetime. Maybe my grandkids will be able to drive from Mays to Goddard on it, but I don't know if you'd want to add anything to that.
No, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for addressing that, because I've been a big proponent of the Northwest Expressway. We call it Expressway instead of bypass. And Mays and Goddard have been two partners with us on this. I've been hoping we'd get the city of Wichita to be a partner on it. Someday they'll figure it out that that's the only direction they have left to grow. And I hope that they join us. But that is the perfect example of what I'm talking about out in the county to connect some major cities that are growing, and how are we going to move that traffic, and how are we going to take the farmers that are growing grain out in western Kansas and have to come up here and they can bypass around the city and take it up 254 and right on up to Kansas City. It's the perfect solution to a lot of problems. We just need to convince more people of it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Jonathan? All right, Jonathan, you wanna,
Thank you.
or Peter?
Thank you. And that brings us to our action item. So we can approve the population projections as presented, not approve the projections, or approve with specific changes. The TAC recommendation was to approve the population projections as presented.
All right, a lot of great comments came out of this. Appreciate all that. Would anybody like to approve the population projection as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve it, and I do appreciate Commissioner Dennis's comments. Don't use this thing as the way to make decisions. So it's only a guide.
What are you seconding? Yeah. Commissioner Dennis is seconds, both of those. So we have motion and a second to approve the population projection as presented. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? All right, thank you.
And those additional charts will be available, emailed or?
Should be
such?
online, right? On the
Okay, all right.
website.
Thank you.
All right, next we have discussion and updates. The first is 2025 UPWP planning. Chad or Markey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Transportation Policy Body. Unified Planning Work Program is an annual required federal document that documents, the upcoming activities of staff. What are the initiatives and ongoing activities that go on? We coordinated with Federal Highway Administration staff and KDOT and partners, planning partners, that's usual in developing this, since June, we started this effort. What goes inside this document in detail, Mark is here to report to you what are the activities. Some of them are ongoing that you have already well aware of, like, for example, long-range transportation plan, metropolitan transportation plan, and then you already know the TIP amendments and other studies like safety and so on. So I'll request Marky to dive into details of what encompasses this UPWP. Marky.
Yes, thank you. Marky Jonas, Administrative and Public Outreach Coordinator. I'll do my best not to repeat too much of what Chad said again, but just kind of an overview. The Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP, outlines WAMPO's transportation planning activities and tasks for the year, and it describes how the federal planning funds allocated to WAMPO will be used, and then just details about what activities both staff and consultants will be doing throughout that calendar year. And it is developed every year. And then, as noted in the packet, it serves a lot of purposes. It's not only just budgeting. It is planning scope, it is schedule, it's coordination, public involvement, and also compliance with some of our federally required documents. Which is why this first table is up here, which shows our core documents, including the Unified Planning Work Program, and those all need to be maintained. So that includes the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the Transportation Improvement Program, the Congestion Management Process, and the Public Participation Plan. And so those are all things that we keep in mind while developing our UPWP for the next year. As Chad mentioned, we met with planning partner staff to discuss the potential planning activities for 2025, which was both based off work completed so far and expected to be completed in 2024, as well as the plan cycle updates for the documents I just mentioned. So for 2025, some of them, and I'll just give a very brief overview, that includes the development of our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, ongoing safety initiatives and activities, general just accounting services, continuing economic development study, the K-15 corridor study, continuing with our bicycle and pedestrian counts, the regional active transportation plan, ongoing transit planning, and then the safe routes to school planning that Kim mentioned earlier. A couple more, one to definitely mention is the Title VI and Limited English Proficiency Plan. Those fall under the public participation guidelines. Both of those plans will be updated in 2025. We also have administration for the Transportation Improvement Program that was just approved. And then we have ongoing maintenance and development for the travel demand model and congestion management process. Another big task we have planned is the household travel survey, which will collect data regarding travel patterns in the region. And then we also have the intelligent transportation systems architecture, which was one of the consent items today. And then transportation pooled funds, which is it's a super cool program. I'll detail that because that's a little bit more new. And they conduct interesting high priority research for more than just one entity. So it allows smaller organizations to participate in more in-depth and more robust studies. And then there are a couple other ones listed on here that are not directly WAMPO plans, but they are ones that have regional significance. And so thus are detailed in the UPWP since it is a federal document. So then, since this is a discussion item, the main reason we wanted to present this is for feedback. If anyone has things that we're missing, if there's something that doesn't sound right, please let us know. And then also just to give a brief timeline, which is still tentative, we plan to have this ready for state and federal review by the end of the week. And then the 30-day public comment period will be in September to October. And then we'll have some time to incorporate any public comments. And then it will go for a TAC recommendation in October and to the TPB for a vote in November. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Marky. Yes, we would seek your approval in the month of November, but before that, those are the next steps that we go through. Just to give you a heads up before November, what's going on and what coordination is happening. That's what Mark and I wanted to keep you informed. And if you think, there's a study that is beneficial to the region, we want to, receive your feedback and incorporate those types of reasons that today's presentation is.
Yes, and like Chad said, we will definitely be presenting more updates as this. It won't just be brought to you in November without more legwork in front of that.
Totally. Are there any questions, Marky, about the Unified Planning Work Group or work program? Not seeing any.
All right.
Thank you. Moving on to item B, the MTP 2050 Public Engagement Round 3 Results Summary. Marky?
Yes, and I will just do a brief overview of this rather than detailing all of it. But the third round of public engagement for Metropolitan Transportation Plan 2050, or MTP 2050, was conducted from May 20 through June 30. We utilized several strategies, including a survey to engage with the public about the development of the plan and how it will shape the transportation network. 474 surveys were recorded. And just to mention that it's important to note that the purpose of this round of engagement was just as an engagement tool. It is not meant to be a statistically valid representation of all of the region's residents. It is just based on what feedback we received. So the purpose for this round was to gather opinions on transportation issues and policy alternatives and to document transportation mode usage trends within the region. So aligning with the multimodal focus of this round, the first questions just kind of asked about what modes were most used and then also which may be more desired to use in the future. Then we also had subsequent survey questions that were separated into different categories for the different modes of transportation. So we had one for public transit, non-motorized transportation, or bicycle and pedestrian. And then we had a freight and movement of goods question. And then there was also demographic information. but those questions are not shown here. This table is just a very high level look at the different questions we asked, and then the most popular response, as well as the frequency of that response. Yeah, and then the full report is available on the website and is linked in the packet. So the summaries from public engagement rounds 1, 2, and 3 are available on our website at wampo.org/MTP2050. All of our engagement efforts and the survey responses will also be discussed in the public engagement appendix. And then just to give a bit of a preview, the next round of engagement will be round 4, which is our public comment period and is tentatively scheduled for March to April of 2025. And that round will be focused on seeking input from the public on the draft plan. Does anyone have any questions? Okay,
Marky, appreciate it.
thank you.
All right, next we have item C, the Regional Transit Implementation Plan Update. We have Bill.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Bill Tro with SRF. Every time we do this, I can never find where I go. Thank you.
Just there.
Perfect. Okay, so what I want to do today is give you a little bit of an update as to where we're at in developing the Regional Transit Implementation Plan. That during the last meeting, we had talked a lot about the what we are always referring to as the one-pagers, which were descriptions of various transit improvement alternatives that communities could be considering as we continue working our way through the study. That also, we had talked the last time that we had developed a questionnaire that each of the jurisdictions could go out to a SurveyMonkey website and look at information about each of the alternatives. And then what we were looking for is feedback from your particular jurisdiction, whether or not it might be a county, whether or not it might be one of the municipalities or cities within the WAMPO region. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then as we've also started, and we had a little bit of a conversation this morning with our steering committee, and we've essentially worked our way down the road a little bit of trying to come up with some more multi-community alternatives that we can consider that took into account the information that we had received. So let's start with the questionnaire that was sent out. Is that we sent the questionnaire out to 23 different jurisdictions. We have essentially 3 counties or 3 county jurisdictions within the WAMPO area and 20 municipalities. And again, each of them received a packet of information on each of the potential alternatives that they could choose between, whether and how appropriate they are for their community. And then we were given them an opportunity to respond whether or not that alternative might be not applicable in their community, because we were looking at, say, for example, that we had some regional transit alternatives that were more fixed route that maybe, and I'll put one alternative out there is a connection to Andover from the downtown transit center. Well, the same questionnaire, the same packet went to folks in Clearwater and Goddard and, the other side of the county that probably wouldn't really benefit too much from that particular alternative. They were given the opportunity to say, well, it's really not applicable for us, as opposed to just saying no or not answering it at all. So again, that this has been out there for well over a month. We've sent out a number of different requests of people to, or jurisdictions to complete it. That as of today, we had received 9 community responses back. Those are the ones that I've kind of highlighted here in the blue. and listed off to the side here of those jurisdictions that we have received responses from. If I could ask, please take it, give it a shot. If you're kind of going, well, we're really not sure what we're supposed to be doing with this, that I'll go back up here. Please send me an email. I'll walk through everything with you. I'll walk through it with a small group from your jurisdiction. And if you're taking a picture of that, that packet that is right in front of you has it also, if you can just grab it from there. You know, that I am available to help you work your way through this. It won't take that long. But I think it is going to be critically important as we continue to try to identify real world alternatives and ideas that can help the WAMPO region and move people between their home and jobs, their home and shopping, shopping and their jobs, all of those things that I think really drive the economy of the area. And then, you know, thinking back to the information that was presented earlier on population forecasts, you know, the idea that a lot of the outside of Wichita communities are growing quite substantially, that as we continue to move into the future, there is going to be an additional need for transportation service that goes beyond just highways. Okay, so this table, okay, there's a whole lot on here, so I'll kind of go through it a little bit. That the first column here on the table are each of the alternatives that we had identified within the survey. So, and that associated with each of these, there was also a one pager of a description. So there was, the first alternative here is Derby to the Wichita Transit Center Express service. So in the one pager, there was a description of what the route might be, where stops might be, a cost, a ridership estimate, all of those things that are critically important as you're considering that alternative. And then again, that what we're showing here for in the right-hand columns of this table are the responses that we had received from for those 9 respondents that we had received back. We gave people again that opportunity to say, well, this one's really not applicable for us. They could say, yep, would they dismiss it? That one, it's just not right for us. We could retain it as an alternative that they would be the operator, particularly when you think about things like some of these alternatives include demand response transit service, that service that's consistent with what we have in Derby, what we have in Hayesville, that are operated by a jurisdiction. Or we could retain that concept and that the community has interest in being a partner. Because all the way through this study, we've talked about the idea of partnering, of coordination, of potential consolidation of various communities in their effort to provide public transportation service. And so that each of the alternatives are here, each of the responses, and the color coding that I put in there, you know, the alternatives that we have here are kind of front loaded with starting with 1 for those that are more fixed route. So I would expect in these that we would receive or more responses that would be not applicable because, you know, that is along a particular route connecting the transit center to a particular community. Other communities within the jurisdiction that are opposite direction, they're not going to really see a benefit. And then so that you can see as those ones that are more associated with a particular route are seeing more not applicables and some dismisses. But then also on the right-hand column there, where I've identified them as green in these alternatives or these over here, is that what I'm trying to depict there is that at least one of the communities that would be associated with that particular alternative came back with a positive response. We have interest, and in this case, interest in being a partner in that particular service. So looking at option 1A there, we received a response back from Derby that said, we have interest in that alternative as being a partner, not an operator, but a partner to provide that service. So that they, and we were explaining that as a partner, you have responsibility for the local share. Because, as we had talked about before with transit, is we have 4 elements of funding. We have federal government, we have the state government, we have localities, and we have fares. And then those that I'm showing in yellow are those that here kind of coming down to option 3 through option 6A, that we still are seeing some concept, some responses that are not applicables, but then we're also starting to see some more responses of that there's some interest, and these are more that there's interest, but I still would not see enough interest to say, hey, let's advance those, at least for those locations that we had received responses for. And then those in the last 2 columns that are shown in the green block down here are those, down in here are those that I'm thinking that, well, we're seeing a lot less not applicable. We're seeing a lot less dismissed for those alternatives, and a lot more we have interest in retaining those. We have interest in being at least a partner in those. So these are the kind of concepts that we want to make sure that we're considering to be advanced, and maybe be advanced more broadly within the area. And this is kind of that dilemma zone that we're in right now. Okay, we sent the survey out to 23 jurisdictions. We received responses from 9. We could kind of sit here and go, well, what do we do? Do we just kind of throw our hands up and say, there isn't much interest? Do we continue to find ways of trying to get people to, or jurisdictions to provide responses? Or do we kind of just say, well, let's start to look at least what we have. And is there work that we can do with what we have to date? And then that's what I put together here to kind of give you folks a flavor of where we could be going with this, with the work. And this morning I went through each of these with our steering committee. If you want, I can go through each one. If not, I can kind of just give you a couple of examples of what we're looking at here. Everyone, or examples? Let's go examples. Okay, since Mr. Mayor, you're staring right at me, we're gonna go to Goddard. Yeah, I bet. So, okay, the responses that we received from Goddard that included both the idea of the express service that we had identified. There was interest in that, interest in being a partner, which again, on that one makes sense because each of the outlying jurisdictions are not going to be operating a commuter route into Wichita. You're going to be working with Wichita Transit to provide that service. There, in that situation, you're a partner. But then also there was the new demand response service that would include both a concept for intercity, which is already provided to a certain extent through Sedgwick County Transportation, but then also that missing intra-city within Goddard alternative. And so both of those are ideas that I would continue to advance. And what we will be doing in that situation is then pulling together these 2 concepts and giving you a little bit more documentation of, okay, here is again the 1-page summary of the express service, including ridership, including cost, so that as you guys continue to review things, that you can see those 2 elements. What does it cost? How many riders at least are we serving over the course of a year? Because if it comes back and you're serving 4 and it's going to cost you $20,000, well, you may rethink that one a little bit. So that is one of the examples. Now I'm going to come all the way back over to the other side and go to Derby. That this whole list here are the things that Derby had identified as those things that they support in that community. Now, okay, that while each of the alternatives included a cost, that I have not talked with folks in Derby yet, but what I'm basically coming to in this part of the conversation is we need to get together with representatives from Derby and kind of go through and prioritize this list. Because I cannot imagine that when push comes to shove on coming up with dollars for all of those that are that include local dollars, that every one of them is going to come out as being, well, that's a high priority for us. So I think with the idea of that list in Derby, we would like to talk and say, let's go through and prioritize this list so that when we find a point where, ooh, we're kind of running into more than what we think we can comfortably afford, that let's cut that off a little bit. So that then the intent here is just to kind of give you a little bit of a flavor. And then I want to toss in Mulvane down there also, because I think a lot of the responses that we saw as positives from Derby, they were somewhat mirrored in Mulvane, including the idea of express service from Derby into Wichita. And you kind of look at the proximity of those two. And if I'm in Mulvane, I might say, yeah, that's a good idea. I might say, hey, I might even be able to find a little bit of money to put into that, because now I can get relatively, or much more convenient, I guess I should say, transit service into the Wichita Transit network by getting to park and ride, say, in Derby. So now you're going a few miles down the road, not 15 or 16 miles down the road. And again, that there was a whole lot of the same answers. Let's work those two communities essentially as a pair. And then the other one here I'll just talk about is at Sedgwick and Butler County, that both of those counties had essentially consistent responses of what they were interested in. And there, I think the message that we got was the idea of expanding the demand response service that's available, and looking at those maybe more complementary elements of park and ride lots that could then get people a better connection into Wichita Transit. Continuing to consider and think about the Uber Lyft collaboration that was done in Park City in 23. And the idea of getting all you guys to drink the Van Pool Kool-Aid. That I have drank that a long time ago. It was good, and we should continue to really focus on that, particularly when we're looking at all of the employment opportunities that are occurring on the fringe of the metropolitan area, where there is not appropriate transit service today for that. And I think I've said before is that the idea of when we're looking at second shift, third shift work in the fringe, that is not something that we're going to be able to really support with public transit that is going to be affordable within the Wichita area. So again, I put these together so that you can start to see where our intent of going is. And then as we continue to receive more responses, then we can also kind of walk down that path of, well, we're seeing consistency in this kind of service in different areas of the county. Well, do we want, again, each of those jurisdictions to be providing that service? Whereas, again, that each of them has to do all of the elements of dispatch, of hiring people, of maintaining vehicles, all of those things. Or should we be looking at partnerships between communities to share some of those costs? Because you only need one dispatch center for the entire region. Okay, you're gonna have to hire some more people, but each municipality does not need that element of transit service if we're using demand response. And then that can be shared. It's also a relatively costly portion of that service with the software, with the personnel, all of those things easily shared between different jurisdictions. Okay, so where do I anticipate, or where do I think we're going, is that we want to gather some confirmation on the concepts that we've put into the previous map. Are we going down the right path? And then, with Derby and trying to narrow that down a little bit, or at least prioritize those things a little bit. But then, as I said, it's come up with this additional more defined ideas and detail for each of the communities that have come back and said, we want to advance this and continue to consider this. And we'll get you a packet then of those things that are on your, were thumbs up on that list. And then if we want to have a conversation about where it goes, or then you can then figure out priorities if you have to think about priorities. And then we will put together the implementation plan as we understand the package of ideas that there may be for the entire region. One of the questions I know that it's on everybody's mind, or at least some people's mind, because I was told this morning that what is our schedule? And what I am really hoping is that within about the next 6 or so weeks that we can have a draft document together. We've got the existing conditions document all together. We've got, we've got documentation on the packages of alternatives and those things. Where we don't really have documentation yet is what are the responses that we've received to those ideas and what are the final packages. And I think what we will be doing is making sure that we get that existing conditions out on the website. The information on the package of alternatives is already there, but we should go back through then and maybe put that together as it would be in the final document. But then the last part of it is what do the jurisdictions want to do? Because it's really this transit service. And if there's additional transit service within the region or even maintaining what we have, that is entirely a local decision. So we really need input from the jurisdictions that are going to be partners, whether or not you're providing the service yourself, whether or not you're providing funding. The only way to advance more service is going to be getting response back from the communities. Okay, I'm done. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So we are one of the communities that haven't completed the survey, and we'll get out.
Like we talked last month.
Yeah, we did. And I talked to Keith Line this morning. He was on your steering committee, but we'll continue to work on that. But my question, we're meeting with industry, some of our industry. What are some questions that you think we can ask that will help us be able to complete a survey like that? And we're also in the process of doing a community survey for our community, and we'd like to be able to ask some transit questions.
So we should talk.
What that demand is.
We should talk, and then I can help you with some of those questions. Now, the only downside is, that you guys have all gotten a lot of information and trying to push that out to the public so that they understand maybe what these ideas are. That's probably too much. But the idea of asking the question of, do you think we need public transportation service or more public transportation service in the area? And then the $64,000 question is, are you willing to put more money into the game? Those are the two primary questions, other than kind of origins, destinations, things like that, which get to be pretty long. But we can have a quick conversation, and we can help you on that one. And then when you were talking about meeting with employers, that Keith also brought up this morning, that he is organizing a group of larger employers to have a more defined conversation about their perceptions of the need for public transportation within the area. And what we're trying to do is get something set up pretty quick to have that conversation, and essentially then talk with them about, you kind of take the bulk or the package of alternatives that we've developed and turn that around a little bit from thinking about them from a jurisdiction's point of view to thinking about them from an employer's point of view. And, some of them may either fall by the wayside a little bit, or, become a little bit more singular in their focus. But we can use essentially the same package of information. And there, I think, we would also want to incorporate into that conversation, are you interested in being a partner? Particularly those things like van pool. Do they have interest in being a partner? Or a regional route that may have a destination that is very convenient to a particular large employer or a group of employers? And is there interest in helping to fund a commuter route? It's done in a lot of different metropolitan areas of getting those employers that see a benefit of that particular service to have them put a little bit of money in the game, all the way up to paying for an entire route.
Do you have a set of questions that I could ask on Friday? Is that too?
I could have them by the end of the day tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. Because they're there, I'd want to rework them just a little bit. Now, I wouldn't want to rework them too much because then they go too far outside of what we're already doing, and let's make sure that we have dual purpose there. Okay. Any other questions?
All right, thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next we have the Regional Transit Network plan update. Raven, are you online?
I am. Good afternoon, everyone. As promised, we actually have James Gomez, with Nelson Nygaard, who is going to provide that Wichita Transit redesign update for you today.
Thank you, Raven. All right, so we should have the presentation loaded. All right, so thank you all for having me. I think this is a good follow-up to Bill's presentation with the regional transit service study. Nelson Nygaard has been partnering with SRF on that effort, and SRF has also been involved coordinating with us on this effort. Other team members include the Public Policy and Management Center at Wichita State University, as well as Shockey, an engagement firm. We now have been working through various phases of the project. We go to the next screen, please. We see the project timeline. So we got kicked off back in the fall of last year, meeting with staff, and we also met with bus operators. And over the course of the first several months of the project, we took a very deep dive into the existing bus system to look at how it's been evolving in terms of the design and the performance. And also taking a close look at the market conditions within the city of Wichita only. We also followed that up with a rider survey, and we conducted that on board buses as well as at the transit center. We heard a lot about riders, and we'll get to some of those key findings in just a moment. So that helped round out our understanding of how the system is functioning, and then also what are some of the needs of the community. Based on that initial information that we gathered, we started to develop various service concepts that are working within existing resources. So it was a cost-constrained exercise to look at ways that we could optimize the service using essentially the same number of buses and the same number of resources or hours of service. We took that out to the community in the spring, and we heard from riders. We also shared it with stakeholders, and I'll share with you the feedback on those ideas. Currently, we're in the process of refining various growth scenarios. So this looks at ways to further expand the system, both in terms of frequency of service, hours of service, days of operation, as well as geographically, ways that we can take a system that is primarily a hub and spoke system that connects mostly at the downtown transit center, and look at ways to evolve that into more of a connected and more of a diverse network of routes throughout the city. Next slide, please. Over the next couple of slides, I just wanted to highlight some of our key findings from the existing conditions analysis, as well as what we heard from the community. And then we'll jump into the proposed concepts as well as growth options. So I'll start off with ridership, because this tells a story as we look back at how the system has been performing over the last 5 years. So back in 2019, ridership, we saw a huge decline the following spring during the pandemic. But the good news is that ridership has been steadily recovering since then. There are ebbs and flows every single year as we have higher ridership in the fall and spring semesters. That drops off during the summer as well as the holiday months. But overall, the system is trending upwards. And this is weekday and Saturday service combined on this chart on the left. Today, there's about 5,000 boardings per weekday. And on the right side of the screen, we show how that ridership is distributed across the city. The routes are shown in blue. We have various destinations, major destinations shown as circles. And then we also have the yellow to orange and red shadings indicate where you have the highest concentration of ridership activity. A lot of this is concentrated both downtown and some of the neighborhoods in and around downtown, where we have a lot of transfers taking place. Some major destinations that are clustered together. Also, Wichita State University, obviously a major ridership generator, also coming from some of the student residential areas just northeast of campus. And then other major corridors aside from 21st and Broadway include Harry Street, which has numerous destinations and high density housing as well. Most of the ridership that we see on the right matches up with what we saw in terms of the market analysis, where we have the highest densities of population and employment, and then also where we have the highest concentrations of households, either with lower incomes or with limited access to a vehicle. Next slide, please. In addition to studying Wichita transit system, we also looked at various peer cities. So we selected a handful of cities that are similar in terms of size within the region that also have similar densities. And you can see that list on the right side of the screen. Some of the things we compared are just how many days of service they run. Some of the cities have daily service, others are only Monday through Saturday. And then also the hours of operation, and that's shown on the right side of the screen. Those different bars indicate whether they start at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. and when they end in the evening. And Wichita's service span for weekday and Saturday are shown at the top. You can see those are actually the shortest hours of operation for weekday service. And then on the left side of the screen, we show the service investment per capita. So this is how many dollars are dedicated to the transit system for just operations, not capital, not buses or facilities, but just for the regular service that runs throughout the year. And then we normalize this by population within the city. And similarly, we can see that Wichita's at the lower end, at the bottom of the peer cities. We looked at various other metrics, but these are just two that seemed most interesting to us. Next slide, we show some of the rider survey results. So the onboard survey is an opportunity to learn a lot about riders, some of their characteristics, but also ways that they want to see the system improved. This took place back in January, February, and we had over 1,200 responses. It was a survey that was provided in English and Spanish. And what we found that over half of the riders have an annual household income of $25,000. We asked if they work late at night, not past 9 p.m. or on Sundays. You see it's between 38 and 43% work during those times whenever transit service currently is not available. The next slide goes into a little bit more detail about some of the travel characteristics of existing riders. For example, the trip types that they take. There are a lot of students during certain times of the year, but primarily going to work, as well as going grocery shopping and medical appointments. Those are some of the most common trip types. We also found that riders are very dedicated. They ride often, 5 to 6 days a week, more than have to, and they've been riding for a long time. Typically, systems have a lot of turnover, but that's not so much the case here in Wichita. Some of the things that riders are most satisfied about are the safety, the bus drivers, the cleanliness, how helpful they are. Some of the things that they like to see improved include the hours of service, going later at night in particular, and then also bus stop conditions, more shelters, more seating. Next slide, please. So in addition to hearing from riders, as well as just studying the system and looking at some of the peer cities, we also invited several community stakeholders, and these represented a number of different organizations, from social service organizations, nonprofits. We had educational institutions, medical institutions represented, workforce, major employers. And we mix those different groups up, those different organizations, representatives into smaller groups, and we provided them a similar presentation to today, as well as an overview of how transit planning works at the simplest level. Then we laid out various maps on these tables. This was done at one of the Wichita State campuses, and we had them take a limited number of resources and design their bus system. They came up with a lot of interesting ideas and worked together to identify what are some of the challenges. It was also a really helpful exercise in understanding some of the constraints and limitations to today's system with the limited number of vehicles and just overall hours. But as the different member or organization representatives got together, there were some similarities in some of the things that they saw that was most important, including providing 30-minute service on some of the major corridors, having good connections to the university, which really is one of the biggest opportunities to grow ridership and reduce single occupancy vehicle mode share into the future. Also providing access to some of the key destinations, basic needs throughout the city. And there are many neighborhoods that are currently, you would classify them as within food deserts. So we want to link some of these neighborhoods to grocery stores throughout the city. We also learned from these stakeholders that as they were able to identify what are some ways that they could grow beyond today's service levels, some of the things that they saw that are most important is similar to what Ryder stated, which is more frequency, Sunday service, and going to different destinations out on the periphery of the city as the city continues to grow. On the next couple of slides, I could advance one more. I want to highlight just first today's bus network. As I mentioned earlier, it's what we would call a hub and spoke or radial system, where the vast majority of the routes converge at the downtown transit center. A couple of exceptions, routes 201 and 202 are north-south crosstown routes over on Rock and Oliver, but the other routes go into downtown, and many of them continue on as a different route, so they connect at that location. The next slide shows some of the proposed changes that are just working with that set number of hours and vehicles. Some of the things that we would be able to accomplish with optimizing or modifying some of the routes would be to provide more frequent service on the two highest ridership corridors, and that being routes 21 and 22. Those are two that far exceed the other routes today in terms of riders per hour, or what we would measure as productivity. 202 is another strong route that links three of the WSU campuses. One of the other improvements that we'd be able to make is providing a one-seat ride to the Social Security office, which today is located somewhat inconveniently out of the northeast corner of the city past Rock Road. And many riders to get there today have to take two buses from downtown. So this would provide that one-seat ride, and also Route 28, which is the one I'm referring to, would also provide direct access to a Walmart supercenter from a neighborhood that currently does not have direct access to a grocery store. We'd also look to improve coverage in some of the neighborhoods that demonstrated a higher need for transit service, a higher demand, including Plainview. And then also on the north end and South Broadway, we'd look to streamline service there to make it easier for more people to get to the stops, and make the routes more direct so that people can have quicker travel time. That also allows some of the routes to operate more frequently. So for example, we have some routes that would go from 60 minutes to every 40 minutes, or from every 40 minutes to every 30 minutes. And this is all possible just by reorienting the routes. Now, despite these improvements, we don't want to stop there. There's many opportunities to go well beyond this. And that was some of the feedback that we heard from stakeholders and non-riders, is that they would like to see even more routes that do not go downtown. We're planning for the future Delano hub, but this network could be implemented in advance of that facility opening. So with that in mind, that there's opportunities to go well beyond this system. The next slide, we start to get into some of the, actually, I'll pause there and highlight some of the community outreach that we did. So we took out that similar map to the transit centers, We had an online survey, so we got feedback that way. But as we look into the future and these future expansion options, advance one slide, please. Here are the different service opportunities that are out there. So those shown on the blue or on the top part of the screen, those are some of the highest priority improvements based on what we've collected, what we've heard from the community, and also just best practices. That 30-minute service on some of the second tier routes, that's going to help increase ridership. That's also going to reduce travel time, improve connections, and make for a more convenient system. Later services is one of the biggest needs that we found, as well as Sunday service. Sunday service typically doesn't yield high ridership, but it's similar to Saturday level of ridership. So that's something I did want to mention. And then route extensions, and there are some cases where we have routes that are ending just short of a potential destination or neighborhood. So there are some opportunities with more vehicles and more hours to take some routes a little bit farther to the edge of the city, both on the west side, the northwest, as well as the northeast. And then on the bottom half of the screen, we show other longer term. These could be 3 to 5 years out, and even beyond that, opportunities to further enhance the system with more routes that could be crosstown routes to eliminate that need to go downtown to transfer where it makes sense, say, for example, to the campus. And then also other more specialized routes, such as from the airport to Delano and downtown. Employment shuttles that would operate more in a reverse commute fashion, where they bring people from the heart of the city out to some of the major employers on the periphery in a more direct way that would be linked with different shift times. And then micro transit service is often designed in areas where you don't have enough people or demand for a bus, but there still is some need for public transportation. So that could fill in some of the gaps in some of the areas out on the far periphery of the city. One idea that we've explored is ride-hailing vouchers. That's working with like an Uber or Lyft to provide discounted rides at times when the bus doesn't run, like late at night, for those third shift employees. But this slide overall just summarizes all the different opportunities that are available with more funding. And that's the key thing. I think this is similar to Bill's recent presentation, that in order to get to this level, there would need to be increased funding to help realize these different concepts. So I will pause there, and I'm happy to revisit any of the slides that I just went over, or answer any other questions that you may have.
Anybody have any questions for James? I'm not seeing any, James. Was that the end of the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, great. It's a lot of great information there. So appreciate it. Thanks, Raven. All right. Next, we have committee updates. We have a executive committee. I know there's a meeting this week.
Yeah. This Thursday, Mayor.
Okay. So executive committee meeting is this week on August 15th at 11 o'clock. Next is the KDOT.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick update from Topeka. So we are currently accepting applications to the KDOT cost share program. It's one of our more popular programs where we essentially partner with communities and complete a wide range of transportation projects. So those applications are due September 19th, and there'll be an informational webinar on August 21st. And we mentioned the canal route study earlier today. We are currently signing our agreement with Federal Highway for the grant that was received. We're identifying staff to manage that effort, preparing an RFP. We'll be hiring a consultant to assist with that study. And we should be underway in early 2025, so next year.
Okay. So do you know what the KDOT cost share, if you're aligned to receive it, or if you've already been approved for one, can you keep applying for other ones, or how does that work?
I would say there's no restriction on repeat applications from sponsors. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. All right, next we have, see the Kansas KDOT. Oh,
JB Wilson, Public Information Officer for the Wichita Metro. Currently northbound and southbound Eisenhower Airport Parkway will have the center and left lanes closed for maintenance. Completion is set for later this month. After which phase 3 will start and the right lane will begin to receive rehabilitation. I-135 northbound ramp to westbound US 54 is currently receiving milling, patching, and overlay. This phase of the project is set to conclude this month as well. Lastly, this is the newest update. US 54 between Hillside and Webb Road is currently undergoing a patching project. During the day, the left lane will be closed, and at night, that'll be moved to the left and center lane. This is set to conclude in December. Thank you.
all right, thank you. Next, we have, Federal Highway Administration.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few quick updates also. As we, in addition to KDOT's cost share program, discretionary grants, we continue to see very, very successful awards happening here in Kansas for a number of categories. Safe Streets for All. I would like to mention that KDOT was the recipient of over $62 million for bridge improvement project for large bridges in Kansas City, Kansas for 18th Street. So that was a very well-deserved award. Reauthorization. I know it sounds like it's too far away, but it's really not. I would say in 2025, there's going to be a lot of discussions about what will be post-bill, what will be the new program. I envision we'll have a lot of discussion about how successful these grants have been. So feedback from locals will be key, I think, as part of the intake. With every reauthorization, that administration will create a bill that will go to Congress. Sometimes it's dead on arrival, sometimes it's well received, or somewhere in the middle. So, but input will be coming on that. Staffing, like I said, we have Will Sharp here, who I think is going to be a great asset working with the Technical Advisory Committee, and I will continue on the TPB board. Our administrator is going to be in Kansas at the end of the month as part of the state of Kansas and Missouri are co-hosting MASTO for the state DOTs. So our administrator will be here and will be at some events in the Kansas City area. That's all I have. Any questions for me?
All right, thank you. All right, next we have other business. We have none. Next we have adjournment. Guess we'll adjourn today's meeting. Anybody want to make a motion? All right. This meeting is adjourned.